Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophet Samuel, chapter 10, in a clear and simple way, step by step. So let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to walk chronologically through this absolutely incredible chapter. We're uncovering the dramatic and, honestly, highly reluctant transformation of Saul into Israel's very first king. We're picking up the story right after Saul, who's just an ordinary guy out looking for his father's lost donkeys, has just unexpectedly met the great prophet Samuel. And what happens next? Well, it's going to fundamentally change the course of an entire nation. Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. 1. The private anointing. 2. 3 prophetic signs. 3. Saul among the prophets. 4. The gathering at Mizpah. 5. Hiding in the baggage. And finally, 6. Regulations and reactions. Before we start, I want to emphasize that we're grounding our analysis entirely in the literal text of 1 Samuel chapter 10. We're relying directly on the 1917 JPS Tanakh and the NIV translations. We're looking strictly at the simple, clear meaning of the text, what we call the Peshat in Hebrew. The goal here is to understand exactly who is doing what, where they are, and why these wild events are unfolding. Sticking to the Peshat is absolutely crucial here, because it lets us see the raw, very real human emotion of a man who is completely, totally overwhelmed by a sudden divine calling. Okay, moving into section 1, the private anointing. Our story opens in complete, absolute secrecy, and this contrasts so sharply with the massive, chaotic public events that we're going to see later in the text. Here in verse 1, it's just 2 men standing alone. You have the aging prophet Samuel and the young, completely unsuspecting Saul. Out of nowhere, Samuel takes a flask of oil and privately pours it right over Saul's head, and he kisses him. Now, you have to understand, in the ancient Near East, pouring special oil on someone's head wasn't just, a nice symbolic gesture. It was a massive deal. The Hebrew word for this is mashach, which is actually where we get the word Messiah or anointed one. It was a literal, physical transference of divine authority. It was a way of declaring that God was setting this specific person apart for a holy task. Samuel looks at him and says, "Has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance?" Think about that for a second. In literally a single moment, Saul goes from being a regular guy, just worried about his dad's livestock, to the divinely chosen leader of the Israelites. It's a total mind-bender. That brings us to section 2, 3 prophetic signs. Imagine being Saul right now. You'd probably think this old prophet had completely lost his mind, right? So to prove that this calling is truly undeniably from God, Samuel gives Saul a highly specific sequence of 3 prophetic signs. This happens in verses 2 through 8. Let's walk through these chronological steps because they are incredibly precise. First, Samuel says Saul is going to go to Rachel's tomb at Zelzah. There, 2 men are going to intercept him and tell him, "Hey, the donkeys are found and your father is now worried sick about you." Okay, that's sign 1. Second, Samuel says he'll travel on to the great tree of Tabor. Right there, he'll meet exactly 3 men going up to worship God. And look at the detail here. One will be carrying 3 goats, one carrying 3 loaves of bread, and one carrying a skin of wine. They're going to greet him and offer him 2 loaves of bread, which he actually has to accept. This is deeply significant, by the way, because bread and wine are core elements of worship, showing us that Saul is now being brought into a holy context. And finally, the third sign. He's going to go to Gibeah of God, where, interestingly, there is a Philistine outpost. There, he'll encounter a whole procession of prophets coming down from a high place. And they won't just be walking, they'll be playing musical instruments, lyres, timbrels, pipes, and harps. And they'll be actively prophesying. Samuel tells him all this in advance. These unbelievably specific events serve as supernatural, airtight confirmation that God is directing his every single step. After outlining all this, Samuel gives him one final instruction. Go down to Gilgal and wait 7 days for me to arrive. All right, let's look at section 3, Saul among the prophets. The text explicitly tells us in verse 9 that the moment Saul turned his back to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. He was given a new heart. And get this, the very day those 3 signs actually came to pass, Saul experienced a radical transformation, both internally and externally. Verses 10 through 13 describe the fulfillment of that crazy 3rd sign. When Saul meets that procession of prophets at Gibeah, the Spirit of God comes mightily upon him. And he doesn't just watch them, he actually begins prophesying right alongside them. Now, just to be clear, in this exact context, prophesying didn't necessarily mean standing there predicting the future. It meant entering this intense state of ecstatic, musical worship and praise to God. For the people who knew Saul back home, seeing this rugged, everyday farmer suddenly acting like an ecstatic holy man was completely mind-blowing. It shocked everyone so much that it spawned a famous proverb on the spot.
People started looking at each other going, "What is this that has come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" This phrase actually became a popular everyday saying to describe a totally unexpected, radical character shift in someone you thought you knew well.
But then, right after this amazing high, in verses 14 to 16, we see a really fascinating character trait emerge in Saul. When he finally returns home, his uncle pulls him aside and asks, "Where have you been?" Saul tells him the mundane stuff. He says, "Oh, we went looking for the donkeys, couldn't find them, so we went to see Samuel, and he told us they were found." But his uncle is clearly suspicious that there's more to the story. So he presses him, saying, "Tell me, please, what did Samuel say to you?" And what does Saul do? He deliberately hides the massive secret. He remains completely, totally silent about the kingship. Whether it's out of deep humility, sheer fear, or just feeling entirely overwhelmed by the weight of it all, Saul keeps this earth-shattering news completely locked up inside. Moving on to section 4, the gathering at Mizpah. Let's shift to the next scene and see how all this tension finally builds. In verses 17 to 19, the narrative suddenly explodes from these intimate, quiet family secrets to a massive, sprawling national assembly. Samuel calls the entire nation of Israel together before the Lord at the town of Mizpah. But before he announces who the king is, Samuel stops and delivers an incredibly stern reality check. He explicitly contrasts God's past deliverance from Egypt with the people's current, very human demand. He tells them plainly with deep, heavy gravity, "I brought Israel up out of Egypt, but you have now rejected your God and you have said, 'No, set a king over us.'" You see, even though God is actively giving them exactly what they asked for, a king, Samuel wants them to understand the theological weight of what they've done. Asking for an earthly monarch, just like all the other surrounding nations had, was essentially a rejection of God's direct sovereign rule over them. It's a heavy, heavy moment. Then, starting in verse 20, the actual public selection process begins. Now, to understand this, we have to look at how they narrowed it down, because they didn't just hold a democratic election with ballots. They likely used the Urim and Thummim, or the casting of lots. This functioned as a divine lottery, revealing God's preordained choice publicly to all the tribes. Through this incredibly tense public process of elimination, they narrow it down step by step. First, they bring all the tribes forward, and the tribe of Benjamin is chosen. Then, out of the tribe of Benjamin, they bring the clans forward, and the clan of Matri is chosen. Finally, out of the men of that clan, Saul, son of Kish, is definitively chosen as king. It's official. The secret private anointing is now a very public fact. But suddenly, right at this climactic moment, there is a major problem. And that brings us to section 5, hiding in the baggage. Just as the narrative reaches its absolute climax, and the brand new king is supposed to step up and be presented to the entire breathless nation, in verse 21, they look around for him, and he is nowhere to be found. He's just gone. The panic in the crowd is so real that they are forced to stop everything they're doing and literally inquire of the Lord just to find out what is going on. They have to ask God, "Has the man come here yet?" You can almost feel the sheer crushing awkwardness of the moment. Did the new king even bother to show up to his own coronation? God answers them in verse 22, and the answer is incredible. God says, "He has hidden himself among the baggage." This right here brilliantly illustrates the supreme irony of the whole text. Here is the chosen king, a man destined to lead armies into battle, and he is discovered literally hiding among the luggage and the supply wagons of the assembly, just trying to avoid his fate. It shows us in the most vivid way possible just how intensely reluctant and completely, utterly overwhelmed Saul was by this calling. He did not want this spotlight. So in verses 23 and 24, people run over to the baggage train and literally pull him out of his hiding spot. And when he finally stands up among the people, his impressive physical stature ends up doing all the talking for him. He is literally a head taller than anyone else in the entire crowd. Samuel points him out to the nation, saying, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." And this impressive, towering visual instantly wins over the crowd. All that awkward tension breaks, and they enthusiastically erupt into massive cheers, declaring, "Long live the king," or as it sounds in the original Hebrew, Yehi HaMelech. Finally, we reach section 6, regulations and reactions. Now that the king is finally revealed and accepted by the public, Samuel doesn't just pat him on the back and send everyone home. Not yet. In verse 25, Samuel knows he must quickly establish the constitutional groundwork for this brand new monarchy. The absolutely crucial point here is that Samuel formally writes down the rules, the rights, and the duties of the kingship on a scroll, essentially creating a constitution, and he places it before the Lord. Now, we have to realize this is a radically profound concept for the ancient world. In almost every other ancient civilization, kings had absolute, unchecked, dictatorial power. But right from day one, Israel's king is explicitly placed under the authority of God's law. He answers to a higher power. Only after this crucial legal step does Samuel disperse the newly minted kingdom, sending everyone back to their homes. Now let's look at the final verses of the chapter, verses 26 and 27, where we see the immediate aftermath of this crazy day. Saul goes home to Gibeah, but the public reception is severely, deeply split. On one hand, a group of valiant men, whose hearts God had touched, rally behind him. They go with him and form his initial loyal escort. But on the other hand, a group of hardcore detractors openly despise him. The literal Hebrew term used for these troublemakers is B'nai Belial, which translates to sons of worthlessness or wicked men. They look at Saul and actively mock him, saying, "How can this fellow save us?" They refuse to respect his authority, and crucially, they bring him no tribute or gifts, which was a massive public insult in that culture. And the chapter concludes with this incredibly powerful, unresolved image. Faced with direct opposition, public insult, and a total lack of respect on his very first day as king, how does Saul react? Verse 27 ends with a short, profound sentence, "But Saul kept silent." The literal Hebrew phrase used here implies he acted as one who is completely deaf. He pretended he didn't even hear them. In this incredibly tense moment, Saul exercises unbelievable self-control and humility. He chooses to just absorb the insult rather than start his reign with petty vengeance, anger, or bloodshed. So let's take a step back. We've watched Saul go from a completely private anointing to receiving crazy divine signs, to publicly hiding in the baggage, to towering over a crowd, and finally keeping his absolute peace against harsh critics. This leaves us with an incredibly compelling cliffhanger. How in the world will a man who didn't even want the crown in the first place step up to handle a newly divided nation? As we wrap up, this chapter actually teaches us some really profound, practical lessons for our own lives right now. First, we see the immense value of humility, learning how to keep a secret and stay grounded, instead of immediately bragging to everyone about our successes, just like Saul did with his uncle. Second, we see that God prepares us for our callings step by step by step, just like those 3 perfectly timed signs given to Saul. And finally, we learn from Saul's profound silence at the very end that true strength sometimes means just acting deaf to your critics and ignoring the troublemakers until the right time. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.